Hey everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about something that I know a lot of you have been asking about. It's sustainable building practices.
Yeah.
And, you sent over a bunch of really interesting articles and research papers, and I have to say, even getting into this stuff has been eye-opening for me.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and there's this one quote that really stood out to me. It's from Diana Ergivorsatz, who is a leading environmental scientist and a key voice in one of the articles that you shared.
She's brilliant.
And she said, it's a case where we can have our cake and eat it too.
Wow.
And I just thought that was a really bold statement. Like, when you think about how complex sustainable building can seem to be,
Yeah, for sure.
what makes her so confident?
I think one of the reasons she's so confident is that buildings and construction are a much bigger piece of the climate change puzzle than most people realize.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking a whopping 37% of global carbon emissions.
Wow, that's huge.
And there are actually two main types of emissions that we need to consider.
Okay, two types. I'm ready to go deeper.
All right, so you've got operational emissions, that's like your everyday energy use. Things like lighting, heating, and cooling the building. It's what most people think of when they hear building emissions.
Yeah, for sure.
But then there's also what's called embodied carbon.
Embodied carbon.
And those are the emissions that come from the materials themselves. Like the concrete, the steel, the insulation.
Oh, okay.
And the actual process of constructing the building.
Okay.
So it's not just how a building performs energy-wise, but it's also about how it was made.
That's a really interesting point. It's like we have to think about the entire life cycle of a building, not just the day-to-day energy use. And I feel like this has implications for all of us, right?
It does.
I mean, whether you're thinking of renovating your kitchen or buying a new condo or even just dreaming of your future eco-friendly home, this stuff matters.
Absolutely. This isn't just about individual choices, though. We're talking big systemic changes that need to happen.
Yeah.
And it's already starting to happen. Both the U.S. and the EU have set some seriously ambitious goals to reduce building emissions.
Okay, what kind of goals are we talking?
The U.S. is aiming for a 90% reduction by 2050.
Wow.
And the EU wants to completely eliminate them by then.
Whoa. Okay, those targets are huge. I gotta ask, is it even possible?
Yeah, that's the big question everyone's asking.
Yeah, where do we even begin to make changes that big?
Well, it's a massive challenge, no doubt, but I'm here to tell you it is possible. The key is we need a complete overhaul in how we approach our built environment. This isn't about making small tweaks. It's about fundamentally changing the way we design, build, and operate our buildings.
Okay, so it sounds like we need more than just a little extra insulation here and there. I keep hearing this term deep retrofits thrown around.
Yeah, that's a hot topic these days.
Yeah, so can you explain exactly what that means?
Sure. A deep retrofit is basically a major renovation that aims to dramatically reduce a building's energy use. We're talking 80–90% energy savings for heating and cooling. To get there, you have to take a holistic view of the building. Think of it as one integrated system. We call this improving the building envelope, which is basically the outer shell of the building.
Okay.
It's about reducing energy needs as much as possible, rather than just trying to make an inefficient building run a little bit better.
Well, I'm picturing things like adding a ton of insulation, replacing old windows. What else is involved in a typical deep retrofit?
Yeah, you're on the right track. Enhanced insulation, high-performance windows, those are definitely key.
Okay.
We also pay close attention to thermal bridges, which are basically any spots where heat can easily escape.
Okay.
For example, where a beam or pipe passes through the insulation. It's about sealing up leaks and cracks to improve airtightness, too.
Oh, okay.
And we often integrate heat recovery ventilation systems,
Oh, right.
which are incredibly efficient at bringing in fresh air without wasting a lot of energy. The ultimate goal is a building that needs very little additional heating or cooling to stay comfortable year-round.
Okay, that makes sense. But I have to admit, I'm wondering about the people living in these retrofitted buildings. Like, sure, saving energy is great, but is it actually impacting their day-to-day lives?
It absolutely is. That's what makes this so fascinating.
Oh, really?
The benefits go far beyond saving money on your energy bill. One of the sources you shared told this great story about a woman living in a retrofitted apartment building in Hungary.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. It was really striking.
Yeah, she talked about how her quality of life drastically improved after the retrofit. Obviously, lower energy costs were great, but what really stood out was she mentioned she had to clean 5 times less.
What?
Because there was so much less dust.
Wow.
Yeah, the improved ventilation system made a huge difference.
Didn't she also say her allergies cleared up too?
Yes, and that's because deep retrofits often lead to significantly better indoor air quality.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's linked to a bunch of health benefits, reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, fewer respiratory illnesses. Some studies even suggest it can help you sleep better.
Wow, I had no idea.
These are often called co-benefits because they're kind of unexpected, but they can have a huge impact on people's lives.
Wow. So we're not just talking about saving the planet here. We're talking about healthier, happier people.
Exactly.
I'm sold on the benefits, but what about the cost?
Yeah.
Let's be real. These deep retrofits sound pretty expensive, especially for older building.
Yeah, it's true that upfront costs can be significant, especially for older buildings that need a lot of work. But you have to look at the long-term financial picture. Those lower energy bills start adding up right away, and there's a good chance your property value will increase too. Plus, there are more and more government incentives and programs to make these upgrades more affordable.
So you're saying it might not be as financially daunting as it seems at first?
Exactly. And here's something really interesting when you look at it from a societal perspective. Deep retrofits are one of the most cost-effective ways to reduce carbon emissions.
Wow.
So they're good for the planet, good for your wallet, and good for your health. That's what Diana Irga-Vorsatz meant when she said we can have our cake and eat it too.
Okay, I'm getting a much clearer picture now, but let's dig a little deeper into one key element here, insulation.
Sure.
Why is it so important when we're talking about building emissions?
Here's the thing. The insulation materials themselves might not have a huge carbon footprint individually, but the sheer quantity we use is mind-boggling. It adds up fast. And to make matters worse, many commonly used insulation materials are heavily reliant on fossil fuels for their production.
Oh, so can you give us some specific examples?
Yeah, think about those ubiquitous polystyrene foams. Some release potent greenhouse gases like HCFCs during manufacturing, and many insulation materials are basically just different forms of plastic,
Oh, right.
which come with their own environmental and health concerns like microplastics and chemical leaching. Not exactly what you want surrounding your living space.
That is definitely concerning. So if conventional insulation has so many downsides, what are the alternatives?
Well, this is where it gets really exciting. The research you shared highlights some incredible innovations in bio-based insulation materials. One project that stood out is BIO4EEB. They're doing some really promising work in this area.
Bio-based insulation. Okay, that sounds intriguing, but break it down for us. What exactly are they, and what makes them better than the conventional options?
All right, so bio-based insulation materials are made from renewable sources like plants.
Okay, so like,
Think hemp straw, even seaweed.
wait, seaweed insulation, that's a new one. What makes these plant-based options so much better?
Well, first off, they have a much lower carbon footprint because they're not made from fossil fuels.
Okay, that makes sense, cutting emissions right from the start.
Exactly. But it gets even better. Some bio-based materials can actually sequester carbon. That means they can lock up carbon dioxide that was absorbed during their growth, keeping it out of the atmosphere.
Wow.
It's like they're doing double duty, reducing emissions and actively pulling carbon out of the air.
That's amazing. So it's not just about doing less harm, it's about actually helping to heal the planet. But I have to ask, are there any downsides to using these bio-based materials? There's always trade-offs, right?
You're absolutely right. One challenge is scalability. We need to be mindful of the available biomass. It's not unlimited, and sustainable sourcing practices are essential. We can't go chopping down forests to make insulation.
Right, so it's about finding that balance between using these resources and making sure they're replenished responsibly.
Right. And then there's the cost factor. Bio-based materials can be more expensive than conventional options, at least for now. But as demand grows and production scales up, we can hope to see those prices come down.
I'm really curious about some specific examples of these bio-based insulation materials. Can you tell us more about the most promising ones?
Sure. One that I find particularly fascinating is Posidonia.
Okay.
It's a type of seagrass that's abundant in the Mediterranean.
Oh, wow.
It washes up on shores in huge quantities. So it's essentially beach waste that can be turned into insulation panels.
Wow.
It's a great example of a circular economy in action.
Wow. So not only is it a renewable resource, but we're also finding a valuable use for something that would otherwise just be waste.
Exactly. And then there are the more traditional building materials like hemp and straw,
Right.
which are making a comeback. They've been used for centuries, and they're proven to be effective and durable insulators. We're kind of rediscovering the wisdom of the past and combining it with modern technology.
That's a really cool approach, looking to nature for inspiration.
Yeah, and another exciting area is bio-based foams. They offer a more sustainable alternative to the conventional petrochemical-based foams commonly used in insulation. It's about moving away from reliance on fossil fuels and turning to plants to create these essential building materials.
This has been so eye-opening. I'm already thinking about buildings in a whole new way, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we need to talk about how we actually measure the environmental impact of all these different materials and approaches. You mentioned life cycle assessment earlier.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that is and why it's important?
Absolutely. Life cycle assessment, or LCA, is like a product's environmental report card.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it tracks the impact from the moment the raw materials are mined or harvested all the way to the end of its life. It helps us understand the true environmental footprint of a material or product, taking everything into account: energy use, water consumption, emissions, waste generation, even the potential for environmental toxins.
Okay, so it's not just about how the material performs in a building. It's about the entire journey from cradle to grave.
Exactly.
I have a feeling this is a pretty complex process.
It can be. A full LCA is a very detailed analysis and can be quite expensive, which can be a barrier for smaller companies or projects.
So how do we make LCA more accessible and practical for everyone involved in building and design?
Yeah, that's a key challenge, and researchers are developing more streamlined methods. One approach is to zero in on the biggest impact areas. It's about identifying the stages in a product's life cycle where the most significant environmental burdens occur so we can prioritize efforts and resources where they'll make the biggest difference.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between getting a complete picture and making it doable for everyone.
Precisely. And the ultimate goal is to integrate LCA into the design process right from the start. This allows architects, engineers, and builders to make informed choices about the materials and technologies they use.
This makes me think about something we talked about earlier, how the importance of embodied carbon grows as buildings become more energy efficient.
Yes, and that's where LCA becomes even more critical. If we really want to reduce the carbon footprint of our buildings, we can't just focus on operation and energy. We need to consider the embodied emissions from the materials throughout the building's entire life cycle.
That's a really crucial point. So much to think about. It seems like we've covered a lot of ground already. Before we move on, are there any key takeaways you want to emphasize for our listener?
Absolutely. First, I hope you're walking away with a deeper understanding of how much buildings contribute to climate change. It's not just about the energy they use. It's about the materials, the design, the construction, and everything that happens from the moment we start building to the day it's eventually demolished.
It's about looking at the entire system, not just the building in isolation.
Exactly. And the second takeaway is that there's so much hope.
Oh, good.
We have innovative solutions emerging from deep retrofits and bio-based insulation materials to cutting-edge technologies that are revolutionizing sustainable design. We have the knowledge and tools to build a better, more sustainable future. It's a matter of using them.
And that brings us to our final takeaway. We all have a role to play.
Absolutely.
Whether you're a homeowner, a renter, an architect, a builder, or someone making policy, there are things you can do to make a difference.
It's about making informed choices, advocating for change, and embracing innovation. Together, we can create a built environment that is not only beautiful and functional, but also sustainable and resilient for generations to come.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation, and I'm feeling really inspired. Before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, I have one final thought-provoking question for our listener.
Okay, shoot.
We talked about this idea of already having enough buildings in the developed world.
Right.
What if we truly embrace that concept? How would our cities and towns evolve? What would happen to the construction industry? What new opportunities might emerge? Something to think about as we continue our exploration.
Great question.
Yeah. All right, we'll be back soon with more on this fascinating topic.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back. We've been unpacking some pretty complex ideas about sustainable building practices, and I'm curious, what's really resonating with you so far? What's standing out as a particularly interesting or relevant to your own life and the choices you make? One of the things that really struck me is this idea that in many developed countries, we already have enough buildings. It's kind of a radical concept, but it makes you think, right?
Yeah, it is thought-provoking. In a lot of developed nations, populations aren't growing rapidly, and we've already got a significant amount of built space per person. So, the question becomes, do we really need to keep constructing new buildings at the current rate?
So you're saying before we even think about new construction, we should be focusing on making the most of what we already have. So that means like retrofitting and repurposing existing buildings instead of always building new.
Absolutely. Obviously, there are always going to be exceptions. But in a lot of cases, it just makes more sense, both from an environmental and an economic standpoint, to adapt what we already have rather than starting from scratch. Think about all the embodied carbon we can save by giving older buildings a new lease on life.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like shifting our mindset from constantly expanding outwards to focusing on optimizing and renewing what's already there. I'm picturing cities where instead of tearing down old structures, we're reimagining them, transforming them into something new and exciting. It's a whole new way of thinking about urban planning. But let's get practical for a moment. Let's say we've convinced everyone that deep retrofits are the way to go. How do we actually make it happen on a large scale?
Yeah.
These projects seem like they'd require a ton of money.
You're right. It definitely takes investment. But what's really promising is that a lot of research suggests deep retrofits are one of the most cost-effective ways to reduce carbon emissions. And remember all those co-benefits we talked about.
Right.
Things like lower energy bills, improved health, increased property values. those make the return on investment even more compelling.
So it's not just about spending money, it's about investing in a future that's more sustainable and resilient and ultimately benefits everyone.
Exactly. And there are already some encouraging signs that governments are getting on board with this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're seeing programs and incentives popping up all over to make deep retrofits more attractive to building owners. For example, some countries offer tax breaks or subsidies for homeowners who invest in energy efficiency upgrades.
It's about creating the right financial incentives to make it easier for people to make the sustainable choice, which makes sense to me. But it's not just about government action, right? I
Yeah.
imagine investors are starting to realize that putting their money into green buildings is a smart move.
Absolutely. Investors are starting to catch on that green buildings are a good bet.
Yeah.
They tend to have lower operating costs and higher occupancy rates, which makes them more attractive as investments.
So it's not just about altruism or doing the right thing. There's a solid financial case to be made for building sustainably. It's about profit and planet working together.
I like that. Profit and planet.
And as the market for green building technologies continues to grow, those prices will likely come down, making them even more accessible to more people.
Exactly.
It's like this positive feedback loop. As more people invest in sustainable buildings, the technology improves and becomes more affordable, which encourages even more people to get on board. I love that. What are some of the new technologies and materials that have you excited about the future of building? I know you mentioned 3D printed houses earlier. Is that something you're seeing take off?
Yeah, 3D printed houses are definitely gaining traction. It's amazing to think that we might be able to print entire buildings using sustainable materials. We're also seeing things like solar roof tiles that can generate energy right from your rooftop, and building materials made from recycled plastic. The innovation happening in this field is truly incredible.
It's mind-blowing how quickly things are changing and how creative people are getting with these new solutions. But we've been talking a lot about big picture ideas and technological advancements. Let's bring it down to earth for a second. What can individuals do to contribute to this movement toward a more sustainable built environment?
Yeah,
If someone's listening to this thinking, I want to be a part of this, where do they even start?
that's a great question. There's actually a lot you can do, even if you're not planning on building a new house or doing a major renovation.
Okay, give us the rundown. What are some simple things people can do to get started?
Well, one of the easiest things is to simply be more energy conscious in your daily life. Turning off lights when you leave a room, unplugging electronics when you're not using them, adjusting your thermostat a few degrees to save on heating and cooling. These small things might seem insignificant, but they add up.
It's about being mindful of our energy consumption and making a conscious effort to reduce our impact, even in small ways.
Exactly. And when you do eventually renovate or buy a new home, there are a lot of sustainable options to consider. Look for energy-efficient appliances, choose building materials that are sustainably sourced and manufactured, and maybe even consider investing in renewable energy sources like solar panels.
So it's about doing your research and making choices that align with your values. It's about voting with your dollars, supporting the companies and products that are doing things the right way.
Yes. And don't underestimate the power of advocating for change. Talk to your friends and family about sustainable building practices, support businesses that are committed to sustainability, and get involved in local initiatives promoting energy efficiency and green building in your community. Your voice matters.
It's about creating a demand for more sustainable options and showing that people care about this stuff. It's about using our voices and choices to drive positive change.
Exactly. Every little bit helps, and we're all in this together. Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about making conscious choices and moving in the right direction.
That's such an important message. No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And it's about staying informed and engaged. The field of sustainable building is constantly changing, so we need to keep learning and adapting as new technologies and ideas emerge.
It's a lifelong journey of discovery and innovation. Speaking of which, I'm curious to hear your take on that quote about having your cake and eating it too.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you in the context of sustainable building?
You know, for a long time, sustainability felt like this thing that was good in theory, but really hard to achieve in practice. Like we had to sacrifice comfort or convenience or affordability if we wanted to be environmentally responsible. Like it felt like a choice, either live comfortably or live sustainably.
It's true, there's been this perception that sustainability is a compromise.
Exactly. But what I'm realizing from all the research you've shared and our conversation today is that it doesn't have to be that way. Sustainable building practices can actually enhance our quality of life while also reducing our environmental impact.
Yeah, that's what's so exciting about this field.
Yeah.
We don't have to choose between what's good for the planet and what's good for us. We can have both.
Yeah.
We can have healthier, more comfortable, and more energy-efficient buildings without sacrificing style, function, or affordability.
That's what I love about this conversation. It's about reframing the narrative around sustainability. It's not about deprivation or settling for less. It's about creating a better future for ourselves and for generations to come. It's about realizing that we don't have to choose between a healthy planet and a comfortable life. We can have both. We can design and build in a way that nourishes both people and the planet. And to me, that's what it means to have your cake and eat it too. Welcome back to our deep dive into sustainable building practices. We've covered so much ground, from the big picture of building emissions to the nitty-gritty of insulation materials. But before we wrap things up, I want to kind of circle back to a concept we touched on earlier, life cycle assessment, or LCA.
Yeah,
You described it as a product's environmental report card.
right.
And I think that's such a helpful analogy.
Yeah, it is.
Can you break it down for us a bit further? What exactly does LCK measure, and why is it so crucial for understanding, the true sustainability of a building?
Yeah, absolutely. So LCA takes a holistic approach to measuring environmental impact. It goes beyond just looking at how much energy a building uses while it's standing. It considers the whole journey of a building, starting with the extraction of raw materials and ending with the building's eventual demolition and disposal. So we're talking about manufacturing the materials, transporting them, the construction process, and ultimately what happened to the building at the end of its life.
It's like we're zooming out and looking at the bigger picture, the entire life cycle of a building and all the environmental impacts along the way.
Exactly. LCA takes into account a wide range of factors, including energy use, water consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, waste generation, and even the potential for environmental toxins. It kind of paints a comprehensive picture of a building's environmental footprint.
That sounds incredibly thorough.
It is.
But I imagine it must be pretty complex and challenging to conduct like a full LCA.
Yeah, you're right. It can be quite a detailed and resource-intensive process, and that's why it's often a barrier for smaller companies or projects with limited budgets.
So how do we make LCA more accessible and practical? How do we ensure it becomes like a standard part of the building process rather than something that only big companies with deep pockets can afford?
That's a question a lot of people are grappling with right now, and thankfully, there's a lot of research being done to make LCA more streamlined and user-friendly. One approach is to focus on the hotspots, those stages in the life cycle where the biggest environmental impacts occur. That allows us to prioritize efforts and resources where they'll have the most significant impact.
It's about finding that balance between being comprehensive and being pragmatic. We need tools that are robust enough to provide meaningful insights, but also efficient and cost-effective enough to be widely adopted. It seems like the ultimate goal is to make LCA so integrated into the design process that it becomes like second nature.
Absolutely. If we can get to a point where architects, engineers, and builders are considering the full environmental impact of their material choices from the very beginning of a project, that's when we'll start to see real change happening on a large scale.
This brings us back to something we talked about earlier, the growing importance of embodied carbon.
Right.
As buildings become more energy efficient in terms of their operational energy use, the impact of those embodied emissions from the materials themselves becomes even more significant.
Yeah, that's a critical point. If we're serious about tackling the climate impact of our buildings, we can't just focus on making them more efficient to operate. We also have to consider where those materials come from and how they're made.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, what are the big takeaways you want our listeners to walk away with? What are the key things you hope they'll remember?
Well, first and foremost, I want to emphasize that buildings have a huge role to play in addressing climate change. It's not just about how much energy they use, it's about the entire life cycle of the building, the materials, the design, the construction, and even the demolition process.
It's about understanding that buildings are part of a larger system, and every choice we make along the way has an impact.
Exactly. And the second takeaway is that we have reason to be hopeful. There are so many incredible solutions emerging, deep retrofits, bio-based insulation materials, cutting-edge technologies that are pushing the boundaries of sustainable design. We have the knowledge and the tools to create a more sustainable built environment. It's about putting them into action.
And that brings us to our final takeaway, which is that we all have a role to play in this transformation. It's not just up to architects, engineers, and builders. Whether you're a homeowner, a renter, a policymaker, or just someone who cares about the planet, there are things you can do to make a difference.
It's about making conscious choices, advocating for change in your community, and embracing innovation. We need everyone working together to create a built environment that's not only functional and beautiful, but also sustainable and resilient for generations to come.
That's a fantastic note to end on. It's been an incredibly insightful and inspiring conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and helping us all understand, the complexities and possibilities of sustainable building.
It's been my pleasure. I always enjoy diving into these topics and exploring what the future holds.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive has left you feeling informed, engaged, and empowered to make a difference. Remember, every step we take towards a more sustainable built environment is a step toward a healthy, more resilient future for us all. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep building a better world.